Daily Rambam for Tuesday, Reish Chodesh Kislev, Tafshin Pei Aleph, the 23rd Perek, Perek Shloisha V'Esrim of Hilchos Shabbos. So this Perek is the third and final Perek where the Rambam goes through the Shvusim, the various Yisurim that are related to the Lamatas Malachas according to the order of the 39 Malachas. This Perek begins with Makabah Patish, as we mentioned previously, according to the Rambam's order, Baina Seisir, Makabah Patish are smack in the middle. After the Geizes, that whole series that has to do with processing wool. Then you have Baina Seisir, Makabah Patish, and the Rambam continues with Tzad, processing skin. And the way that I'm divided things here is that Baina and Seisir is at the end of Perek Chav Beis, and now we're starting Makabah Patish in Perek Chav Gimel. The malachas that relate to processing the skin of animals. So halacha aleph through ches is makabah patish, and we start with making a hole. Halacha aleph. You make a hole which is intended for things to go in and out. So for example, a chicken coop, you make a hole. So the light is supposed to go in and the steam is supposed to go out. So that's actual proper makabah patish. And we actually had this din earlier in Perek Yud. The Rambam said in Perek Yud that if you make a hole in a chicken coop, it's baina. And then a few halachas later, the Rambam said if you make a neck of anywhere, it's told as makabah patish. And the Kesef Mishnah at the time we mentioned asked, Yesh l'tmoya, is it baina or is it makabah patish? And then later he says in Perek of Gimel over here in the beginning, weiter, makabah patish. So that's that question, but the Rambam starts off with the actual makabah patish, and now we're getting to the Shavuos, the Gzeira, the Isser. On top of that, for Perek Chav Gimel, Gazru al kol nekev. So therefore, there's a Gzeira in every hole, even if it's only meant to go in one direction. Because if you make that hole, maybe you'll end up making a hole that you are chayav for. So therefore, you're not allowed to make a new hole in a barrel, and you're not allowed to expand an existing hole. But if the hole was already there and it was closed, you could reopen it. However, that is only allowed. It can't be so low on the bottom of the barrel that it's already past where the dregs are concentrated on the bottom. Because if it's that low, then if there was a hole there and then you close the hole, you didn't just stuff any old thing there to close the hole. You had to make it strong, or else the whole barrel wouldn't be a barrel. So that's like really sealing up the hole. And then opening the hole again would be like making a new hole. The Gemara says, the shamer if the hole was closed, l'chazik, and then Rava says, and Rashi explains there that when the steam, when you close the barrel, and just to preserve the scent of the wine, you don't want it to just be exposed to the air. So then that's not a real, it's not full-fledged steamer, so that's nothing. So you can reopen it. L'chazik though, you don't want the wine to actually come out. The whole weight of the wine is there. So then when you seal it, you really sealed it. So that's it's like making a new hole. If you look at the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Siman Shin Yudaled.
But why should it be that makabah patish? It be pointed because makabah patish simply means the final blow.
Right.
So how is that the final blow? Over here, you're doing an entry on the barrel that's reinforcing the whole barrel. It's being mechazik the barrel. Why should that be makabah patish? It'd be pointed.
It's according to this, it's not anything. It's just a gzeira mishum nekev of makabah patish. If it's only lahaitzi, in this case, the hole is only to be maitzi from the barrel. So in that case, we're saying that it's not even makabah patish. Makabah patish has to be lahachnesu lahaitzi, but we're being geyser when it's only lahaitzi mishum lahachnesu lahaitzi. So you look at the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Siman Shin Yudaled Sef Gimel. So when it comes to the question of expanding an existing hole, because it's the Rambam said v'loi meisifim in meisifim bay. So Alter Rebbe elaborates a bit on that. Alter Rebbe says that if there was a hole and you wanted to expand it, it's aser, but that's only if you intend to. But let's say he says there was a knife stuck inside a wooden barrel from before Shabbos, because you want when you pull the knife out, then the wine is going to come out when you pull it out. So you are allowed to take it out and put it back in on Shabbos, even though just by that friction, you're probably going to expand the hole a little bit. Because it's not your kavanah, it's psik reishe. it's guaranteed that the hole is going to expand with the knife going in and out. However, even making an actual hole, Mlechatchila is only Yasir Midrabanan because it's only Lahaitzi, not really making a real neck of a mak of a patish. So therefore, they weren't machmir if it's Shalebim Meskavein, even if it's Bekresh. And some disagree with that and say they were not matter to remove the knife unless you already removed it once. Once you put it in and take it out, then you already caused all the friction you need to cause. And now it's not going to be Bekresh. It's not guaranteed that putting it in and out again will cause additional expansion. Maybe not. And then if it happens, then it's Davar Sheni Miskav. And Alter Rebbe says the Iker is like the first Svarda that you could be Mekel, but if there's not such a big need, it's better to be Chayshish for the second opinion. What about a knife, though, that's in the wall, a wooden wall? So the Alter Rebbe says if it's really stuck inside the wall, the minig is to treat it like an Isser, to take it out on Shabbos, unless you took it out once before and you put it back, then it's not Psikreshe. But if you never took it out, if you only stuck the knife in, you never took the knife out yet, so then unlikely that you'll be able to remove it without expanding the hole a little bit because it's there, so you've stuck it in with such strength. So pulling it out is going to expand the hole. And the only heter we said before that Shleim Miskaven is with a barrel, because if you were to make the hole Melechatchila, we said it's only Midrabanan, it's on this whole zero over here. But if you make a hole in the wall, sometimes you're Chayav Achatas, because if you make a hole in the wall in order to put a peg, then you're Mamish Chayav. And even if you expand the hole for a peg, you're Mamish Chayav. So therefore, here it's more appropriate to be Machmir that even if it's not for a peg, Psikreshe, that's the minig. However, that wasn't your intention here.
He stuck the knife into a wall in order to put a peg in there.
If that was the case, then it would mamash be chayiv, the Alter Rebbe says. Yeah. In this case, you didn't do that for that reason. It's stam in the wall. But the Alter Rebbe is saying the difference between this and a barrel is in a barrel, if you make a hole, you'd never be chayiv. Here, if you made a hole in certain circumstances, you would be mamash chayiv. In this particular case, you weren't making it to make a hole in the wall. So the Alter Rebbe says, that wasn't your actual kavan in this particular case. In this case, it's you bring the kalk of the wall, whatever you're doing is kalach hayad, but that's the minig, Alter Rebbe said. And then Alter Rebbe goes on to talk about what if there's a knife stuck in other things, and many more halachas along those lines. Alter Rebbe also adds more details regarding the hole in the bottom of the barrel. We're not going to go into everything. Halacha base. Noikvin megufa shel chavis loheitzi mimena yayin. So megufa is sort of the stopper, the cover on top of the chavis. It's sort of sealed in, and then when you want to get wine through the top, you make a hole in the megufa. So you are allowed to do that on Shabbos. Uvad she yikvena lamayla. That's only if you make the hole on top. But on the side, which presumably is the more proper way of doing it, it's awesome. Talking kli. Now you're actually you're sort of taking something that wasn't a keli and turning it into a keli. Mitakin kli is an extension of maka bepatish. Another din here. Shever adam is a chavis milachmen a gregris. Let's say there's a barrel and you have fruit inside, whatever it is, and you break the whole barrel. You're allowed to do that. Well, actually, yiskavan lasses kli, as long as you're not intending to make it thereby a keli. Or maybe you could bring a barrel of wine and to make it a little extra dramatic, make an extra flourish. You sort of take out a sword and you sort of slice the top of the barrel off in front of the guests, and it's not a problem. You're just trying to be extra generous, and you're doing it in this dramatic way, so that's okay. Now today, we have this very famous shaila about opening bottles on Shabbos. So that relates somewhat to this halacha. The question is, in this case, though, you're actually, the bottle itself remains unchanged, but the cap, are you turning the cap into a keli when you free it from the piece on bottom? Was that metakin kli? That's the question. So that's the discussion many places can have, and this is all from the last 70 years or so. And some say all are usher, some say maybe the metal ones are usher and the plastic ones are mutter. And if they say there's a problem, so then you should make a hole first and then remove it. Then there's some that say that it is okay based on this halacha. Shever adam es a chavis lachem and a gregris levad shalei yiskaven lasses keli. And that's this idea that you're not the fact that something became a keli or not, that wasn't your kavanah. You're just trying to get to the food. And there are other arguments that maybe it was a keli. The cover is really a keli. First, they produced the cap. It has this extra piece of plastic attached to it, but it essentially is already a cap. It already exists as a cap. And then they just seal it on the bottle. So did you really actually do anything, or was it a keli before anyway? And the idea that you're not thinking about the cap turning into a keli, who's thinking about that? You're just trying to get to the food. And who even uses a bottle cap as a keli? I mean, very, very unusual to have any further use for a bottle cap. And the pile, the Rebbe, it is said that the Rebbe, for those who are the Farbrengens, probably could say firsthand that the Rebbe opened bottle caps, even metal ones, on the mashka. Apparently, there were mashka bottles with metal bottle caps in order to pour l'chaim, etc. Also, just interesting to point out.
It's interesting because the soda bottles I don't know, less than a couple of decades were all twistles, but prior to that, they were metal with a lining of cork inside. You needed actually a bottle opener to flip it open, and it would bend the cap, and the cap was not usable anymore.
Right, so that would be better, at least for these purposes, right? And certainly taking out a cork is not a problem.
How about a soda can?
Right, so a soda can,
that's a whole...
it occurred to me as I was preparing, I didn't have a chance to double check, but my understanding is that a soda can is more of a shaila because in this case you are actually turning the can into a keli. There might be some arguments to be made that maybe it's a temporary keli, throwing it out, it's one use, but I think generally the correct thing to do is to make a hole on top, somewhere along the top. Hopefully not in a way that causes it to spray, and then to open it.
Why can't you say?
Probably same thing.
Why can't we say in today's generation we're not machshiv these things?
Right.
We go straight to the for 5 cents deposit.
Right. So I'm saying there might be a case to be made that it's not such a problem, but I think generally you make a hole and then you're.
But with the flip top soda cans, if you pour all the contents into a cup and you empty out
right.
the
So by pouring it all out, that might show that you're not really interested in the can at all. Things like that. Like just make a hole and then you're fine. It's not that difficult. Take a knife, make a hole.
But it is a shadow if you don't make a hole.
The discussion, yes. Also, just regarding the sword, I just want to mention that Rambam mentions using a sword. Now, a sword is probably a keli shemalach de le'eser, but it's worth pointing out that when it comes to a kli shemalach de le'eser, you are allowed to be metaltal it and use it for permitted use. So, for example, nowadays, when it comes to scissors, there's no problem to take a pair of scissors out on Shabbos and to cut something that you need to cut, even though it's muktzah, you know, to carry scissors for no reason. But absolutely no problem. If it's something out to cut, you can take a scissors out, just like you can take a sayef out. Hilchos muktzah is in 2 prakim from now, in Perek Chavei. We'll see if we get to there. But just want to point that out. The derech agav here in this halacha.
Use of the scissors.
Yeah. Halacha gimel. So just like you can't open a hole, you can't close a hole. Therefore, you're not allowed to seal the hole of a barrel, even if there isn't an issue of mimareach, or you're not smearing something, so that's not a problem, and you're not causing schita. We mentioned yesterday, you can end up with schita if you stick the wrong thing inside a hole. But let's say you're avoiding those problems, it's still asur. Like you're putting a little piece of wood or a rock. Not allowed to, but if you put something that's edible and it's sort of your way of hiding it away, and the hole is indirectly closed, then it's okay. And you're allowed to sort of put food there on purpose where your real intention is to close it, but you say, I'm just hiding food here. Now the Gemara, though, this idea of putting food there, laharim, in the Gemara it's mashma that it's talking about dafka tzurva midrabanan. It says over there, Harama midrabanan and tzurva midrabanan leyaslim ever lechatchila dafka tamid chacham won't do a lechatchila. The Ram, however, doesn't mention a tamid chacham. So like Mishnah says, it could be according to the Ram was lav dafka. That wasn't the main point of the Gemara. Look in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Siman Shin Yudalid later in Sifchaf. Alter Rebbe, first way the Alter Rebbe writes it first is that you're not allowed to close the hole. It's also come attacking keli, and therefore with the chavis, same things that Rambam says. And when it comes to the rock and the wood, the Alter Rebbe mentions it's even that you prepared it with boyd yoim, because otherwise it would be muktzah. So if we're even talking about closing it with a kesem and a tzira cotton, it would have to be boyd yoim. But you're not allowed to because of makbah patish. But you could put food, And then the way the Alter Rebbe says it first is mutter l'talmid chacham laharam b'davar zeh. Talmid chacham could do it as a trick, that he just does it deliberately, but whoever asks him will say, "Oh, it's just latzniya." But we're not concerned that he's gonna, even if he does it below harama, it's only an ism and different seifrim. So, and he's a talmid chacham, he won't do it without harama. Amaretz cannot, because he might do it without harama, and it's an ism. But yesh matirim, the Alter Rebbe says, and that is the Rambam here. Even for an Amaretz, v'yesh lismech al divreihem lahakol l'talmid chacham. You can rely on what they say. That anyone can do it for Talmid Chacham nowadays, because Talmid Chacham nowadays is a whole discussion of whether anyone really has a din of a Talmid Chacham nowadays. That's a whole separate discussion. So now we can sidestep that discussion by relying on the Rambam, who said even Amaretz. And Alter Rebbe says that's all just referring to using an object like a rock or a piece of wood. That's not the proper way to close something. But if you have a wooden stopper, something that it's the derech to close the barrel with it, so then it's absolutely no problem. It doesn't look like Mitak and Keli. You always use the same thing. However, if it wasn't dedicated for this use, so then you're back to this halacha, harama. Moving on to other aspects of Makabah Patish, and now music, things like that. So often the Rambam first reminds us of the actual malacha. So you're chayav Makabah Patish for anything that concludes a malacha, concludes a job. And because of that, a guided koshu, if you file something down, you shave it down. I am attacking kli, attacking chayav, or if you fix any instrument, any tool, that would also be chayav. So because of Makabah Patish, and because of Gemar Malacha, and because of attacking kli, so therefore it brings us to the gzeira. So therefore you can't make any musical sound at Shabbos. Whether it's instruments like string instruments, harps, things like that, anything else. Even to just bang with your finger on the ground or on a board, meaning with a rhythm. Right? So
everybody in shul is always banging on beats by every nigga.
Right. So that is a question. Right, so the Rambam is specifically mentioning making a rhythm with your hands. Or like karkash as egg is Latinic, or it's just
on purpose used to do
right.
this.
That's going to be the
in front of him used to do this.
That's going to be the next halacha, the clapping. Right. We're still talking here specifically about actually creating some kind of percussion on another object.
Yeah.
Or like karkash as ego is Latinic, or you're bringing the nut to the child, you're making it bounce or whatever it is, you're making noise. Or you're playing with a bell, so it quiets him down. It's all aser, because this might all lead to fixing instruments, which is then in turn Makabah Patish.
When we learned about Kineris in the Bowl a while ago, you said, you explained that in itself, why isn't that considered from the Malachos?
Right.
I think you explained it then.
We discussed it was about kosher, that if you tie it with a bow, so then it's not kosher, but if you put a whole new string, and then we said it's based on Mikdash, that on Shabbos it seems that they did use the kosher for the Avodah, and it's only Shabbos. Yeah. But not extra things like simple space of Sheva, because then there's so many kosher, so that they said not. That was what we said. That.
So far, we've been defining like Makabah Patish as a gezeira.
These are additional things built on top of Makabah Patish. Let's say the nekev that's only lahaitzi is gezeira, or being seis in the nekev.
So then I missed it. What's the pure definition of Makabah Patish?
So, let's say in Halacha Daled, he started off, Kol Dar V'Shuk Mar Malacha Chayav Olav Mishum Makabah Patish. We say Chayav, we mean that this is actual Makabah Patish, or a Tilda Makabah Patish. And Pnei Zagir, Kol Shem Atakin Kli Beis, Dar V'Shuk Atakin Chayav, actually fixing the Keli, that's Makabah Patish. Okay, here we're talking about playing instruments, which may lead you to be Matakin Kli Shir, that's the Gzeira on top of the actual Makabah Patish. If you look at the Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Siman Shin Lamed Ches, and Halacha Aleph, where the Alter Rebbe talks about these din, and the Alter Rebbe says you're not allowed to make noise using an object, make music using an object, because it was this gzeira. And the Alter Rebbe says, Ezu curl shel shir, if you're intending it to make some kind of pleasant sound. Just for example, they might put water in a cup that has a lot of holes, and then you put the cup over metal, and then it keeps on dripping, but with a rhythm. So that could be pleasant. The Alter says it could be like a sound machine for someone who needs to fall asleep. What passed for a sound machine? Cup with holes and banging on the metal. So you're not allowed to do that unless it's a chayla. But for a bari, that would be pleasant sounds, klei shir. He says, however, if you're making noise to wake someone up, that's not klei shir because it's supposed to be discordant. It's supposed to be disturbing, unpleasant, not pleasant. It also says to knock on the door to open, things like that. That's not derech shir. So you're allowed to bang on a door. That you can't use a kli hamayuchel lekach, a door knocker, because you might want to be attacking that. It's its own keli in its own right. So that might be something you'd want to fix. So it's not klei shir per se, but it's parallel. So therefore, the shamish back in the shtetl, the shamish used to bang on people's doors or windows to wake them up, come to shul. So the shamish is aser. He's not allowed to bang with his special keli, but he has to bang with his hand. Nebuch, he has to use his hand. The yesh mekoyim that have a minhag that he has a different keli, not the usual special keli. He just grabs some implement and he just bangs with that. And the komakim, there's no isser unless you actually are trying to create this sound and you're using the tool that creates this sound. But if you're not intending to make any sound at all, it just happens on its own. So he says, for example, you have a bell that has the actual thing inside, or a ring that has something inside that makes it make noise. You're allowed to take them and put them down, even though noise is being made. And you're even allowed to walk around on Shabbos with clothing that has bells on it that are making sounds because you're not intending to ring the bell. And it says for that reason, you're allowed to hang on Shabbos on the Perek a special strap, a special ritzua that has bells. There was a minhag that they used to put a ritzua of bells on the Perek on Shabbos. So that way, if you have a big shul or a shul where everyone's a bit preoccupied and distracted and you want to get their attention when it's time to focus and they're taking out the Sefer Torah, so they put these bells up. We opened the Aron and the bells rang and everyone knew what was going on. So even though the person who hung the bells up wants to make noise, but the person who opens the Aron, this psicha, he doesn't care one way or the other. For him, it's happening indirectly. And even if it was directly, you shouldn't answer in this case because it's tzarech mitzvah. Says. Even for tzarech chayla, we said before you can make a noise machine for the chayla. Even if it's klei shir, it's for sure for a mitzvah. And anyway, it's not kol shel shir.
So the bells on the keser of a Sefer Torah, okay.
So also, bells on the keser of Sefer Torah, according to this, would be certainly okay, not a problem. Interestingly, Alter Rebbe says there that yesh matirin, that you can ask a guy to play instruments at a chuppah because of kavod chasam mekala. Because it's tzarech mitzvah, the ikar simchas chasam mekala is the music. Well, makim mitzvah, there's no amir la'akum for something that's shvus. Shvus for makim mitzvah, amir la'akum, you're allowed to do. However, if one of the strings in the string instrument rips, then you can't tell him fix it because the actual mitakin kli, that's already makim apatish. That you can't even do makim mitzvah. And shaloivim kaim simchas chasam v'kala, you're not allowed to ask him to play. V'achshav nagul hakol b'zeh v'in limchas b'yadam. So interesting that at some point it was common to be makel and ask him to play music on Shabbos for chasam kala or for other occasions. Alter Rebbe also mentions another halacha of something that's the very prototype of an alarm clock. That zug hamakashkesh l'shoyes, it has a weight, and at some point, however it's constructed, every once in a while it makes noise and it serves as an alarm clock. So you're not allowed to set it up on Shabbos because it makes a kol shel shir and it's a kli that's miyuchad, and you want this keli, it has all the conditions to make it aser. But in Boyd Yoim, you are allowed to set the alarm. So that's why you can have an alarm clock nowadays.
And back in the Alter Rebbe's time, they already had pocket watches with chimes. They already had that.
What is it called? Grandfather's clock?
Grandfather clocks.
I don't know. He's not mentioning a clock per se.
They had pocket watches. Back in the Alter Rebbe's time, there already existed pocket watches that you wind them up. They had 24-hour springs.
Okay.
And they had chimes.
Another halacha that is an application of this, the Alter Rebbe says, this is where Shulchan Aruch mentions the game of chess. Mutter lischok ba'atzomas shekaydin Czech in Polish and Czech.
Checkmate, shachmat.
That's in other languages, but like in Polish and in the Czech language, it's Czech.
Czech, yeah, same.
And it's from the Magen Avraham, who writes it originally, that even though when you slam the piece down on the board, you make noise, but you're not trying to create noise. I don't know if you're trying to intimidate your opponent, maybe you are, but in a miskavon l'shir, and but that's all derech tzchok ba'alma, because we're saying you're allowed to play games. Now, there could be other problems. It has to be purely for entertainment. But if you're playing for stakes, for money, then that's a whole different problem. We're going to learn later in this Perek here about Mekach Umemka, to do business-like activities on Shabbos. Out there says in that case, not only chess, but even playing odd and even, grod and umgrod, you're not allowed to play for money because it's Mekach Umemka. So those are some halachas that relate to this. Halacha hey, regarding clapping and things like that. So Mesapkin, I think, is on the thigh, and Meraktin is dancing, and the Tapchin is clapping. Because these are also all adjacent to music, and it might lead you to pull out your instruments and fix them. But to clap the back of your hand is mutter. Now, if you look at the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Siman Shin Lamed Tes, the next Siman, so first of all, Alter Rebbe mentioned Simchas Torah, the Kol HaDeis, you're allowed to dance, even though otherwise you're not allowed to. Then he says, V'achshav, just like they had music playing on Shabbos, so they also were being mesapik and metapeach and merakid, and ein moichem b'yadam, because they're not going to listen, but vadai, so mutav shiyu sheigim, these types of lower level offenses, we say mutav shiyu sheigim. Yesh shalomdu aleim schos, there's a limit schos, and now we're not bucky and how to make instruments. Who knows how to make an instrument? So there's no gzeir of sham yitak and kleshir for something that you're not even going to be able to do. It's not matzah. Alter Rebbe doesn't seem to be fully endorsing that. However, look in Rabbi Alashvili in the Hilchos Shabbos based on Alter Rebbe, and the footnote he says, look in Igros Kodesh Chelik Yud, the letter from the Rebbe, where the Rebbe addresses this and says clearly that the minig is to be makel b'simcha shel mitzvah on Shabbos, minig Yisrael Terehi. Before that, you have the Butchacher, who's a Chassidish Paisik, who wrote about this. I mean, Chazal famously was a Chassidish Rebbe, Chassidish Paisik, who wrote that lamb to be matir in a number of his svarim.
And what? Clapping.
And we saw Ma'aser Rav of the Rebbe, well, clapping and dancing, but yeah, clapping. We saw Ma'aser Rav of the Rebbe used to clap for bringings on Shabbos without a shinoi. And then Rabbi Alashvili mentions Yesh L'Ayin does this had to include banging on the table. So, I mean, he's open to the possibility that if we're being matir that, so then maybe we could be matir percussion also, minor, just sort of unprofessional percussion, because he says, looking out to Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, it says, afilu lahakis be'etzba ala karka ala luach, so it sounds like it's a bigger chiddush than clapping. It says clapping, and then afilu lahakis, by the way, apparently the Alter Rebbe brings that halacha over there. Rambam had it in halacha daled, but it looks like the Alter Rebbe has it in Siman Shin Lamed Tes with the clapping. So it sounds like it's more of a chiddush, it's even less of a problem. So maybe that would also be okay. So maybe a limit schos for those who are
they're talking
also
about Mizmoidim Shel Shabbos. When talking about the Mizmoidim Shel Shabbos, they're referring to more of an a cappella style as opposed to something that has a beat. A cappella means where there's vocal harmonies. So one interacting with the other, but there's no beats.
Right. So the Alter Rebbe addressed making sounds with your mouth. I didn't include that, so the Rambam didn't address directly. Apparently, anything with your mouth should be okay. Even beats with your mouth should be okay. Yeah.
How about whistling?
I didn't see that addressed, so I don't want to.
I wonder if there was ever whistling on Shabbos.
I don't remember.
Interesting.
I don't remember.
Right, Matzmatzah Shabbos, right?
Yeah, it's Matzmatzah Shabbos.
Continuing halacha hey, ein shotin al pnei hamayim, you can't swim, float on Shabbos. You might create some kind of float. Back then, there was like a barrel that you use for floating, for swimming. But if you have a pool, you could swim there. You won't be led to create that for your pool. But there has to be some kind of border around it that makes sure the water is contained, it doesn't come out. So if it's near the ocean, you should be able to distinguish this is the pool separate from the ocean.
The matri swimming on Shabbos.
In a pool. Yeah. Halacha vav. Yeah.
But we learned that no, you're not allowed to on Shabbos.
Make sure to double check it in Shulchan Aruch to make sure that it's okay.
Huh?
Because of the bathing suits? Or because of...
I don't know. I just hear a
Right.
halacha that there might.
Maybe this is according to the Rambam only.
Right. Now you can't pass in every halacha in the Rambam. I didn't double check every halacha in Shulchan Aruch. So if I didn't state that I checked in Shulchan Aruch, this is a general disclaimer. Don't rely on what it says in the Rambam. Halacha Vav. En chayschen shefeda shel kana. You have a reed, and you're not to cut it. You're going to see in a moment, but you can use it to sort of like a faucet or a straw. So you can't cut it down to be a kana for that use. But you're making a kli. If it was already cut, even though it's not fully done nicely, you could stick it into a hole of a barrel and get wine that way. But the fact that it's not fully metukan, we're not choishes that now you're going to be metakan it more. However, also but you're not to put the leaf of a myrtle or something like that into the hole, and that way the wine is going to go smoothly down. It's like making a gutter, something like that.
What?
A gutter.
Gutter.
Yeah. You're not to break earthenware or rip paper. This is presumably as toilet paper, or cheres was also used for that purpose. So you have to have your toilet paper from before. The question would be nowadays usually we speak about toilet paper being ripped along the line, and if you rip it not along the line, it should be okay. So I didn't have a chance to look into all the issues relating to that, but at least here the Rambam is saying also paper, like a long piece of paper and cutting it down to size, might be more of metakin kli as opposed to toilet paper, which is already more or less prepared for toilet paper. I don't know. Halacha Zayin. Zumayra shikshuda b'tafiach. You have it's not like basically the idea being that you have a branch and you have some kind of bucket. It's an informal way of drawing water. So memalim ba b'Shabbos, you can use it on Shabbos to fill up water. And if it's not tied in the malam, then we don't use it. Zera shema yiktem oisa v'yatakna. We're afraid that you might start cutting and trimming and fixing. Also, l'chayv klei kesef begartakain is really a different halacha. You're not allowed to polish silver with gartakain. Gartakain is Greek. It means in Greek it's kreda. Kreda is chalk, white earth that was used for polishing silver. So you're not allowed to do that. You're whiting it, you're polishing it the way the professionals do. And that kind of polishing is like being metakin kli and finishing your malacha. But you can use sand or soap. And same for everything else. You can wipe them and polish them with whatever you want. Also, and you're not allowed to wash bowls and big plates and things like that. Because it's like fixing. Unless you wash them in order to eat another suda on Shabbos, on the same Shabbos. But things that relate to drinking, like pitchers and cups, you can always wash them because you can be drinking all day. No official suda for drinking. You're not allowed to make the bed on Shabbos for Matzah Shabbos, but from Friday night to Shabbos you are allowed to. Now the Maggid Mishnah points out the Ravid here has a saga. When the Rambam went into Vasula Diach Ka'aris, and it sounds a bit like the Rambam is still talking about metakin kli, that somehow washing dishes is metakin kli. The Ravid said no, this is just doing work for the weekday. So the Maggid Mishnah says, when the Rambam said metakin, it didn't mean metakin kli baka patish, he meant metakin the tzedek chayil. The Alter Rebbe only mentions tereach and Shabbos l'choil. The Alter Rebbe says you're allowed to wash all your dishes if you have another suda, even right after the previous suda. Let's say Friday night, you can already wash it if you'll need it for the next day. But if you have a suda shlishus, once you ate your final suda, you're not allowed to wash anymore because then it's for after Shabbos. But drinks, you could do all the cups, you could do all day because there's no keva. But if you know for sure you won't need it, then it's aser. But you could wash 10 cups in case you'll need one of them. If you know you're going to drink, you can wash all 10 cups. Halacha ches. Also, latbul kalim tmeim Shabbos, toveling things and oneself. So you're not to tovel kalim. Now we're not talking about tefillas kalim nowadays here. The Rambam is talking about tumah. You're not to be tovel something that's tamei to make a tar on Shabbos. You're fixing it. Adam, it's like fixing. Adam tamei, but a person mutter litboil.
But kalim is a doiraisa. So if you tovel on a Shabbat, that's also tikkun.
Well, it's not fully clear. I mean, we're listing Zaydus and Shvusim here, so it sounds like it's not actual matakein because it's maybe it's not directly impacting the kli itself. It's sort of a ruchnistic tikkun.
Yeah, but the Torah says it doesn't use a metal keli, unless you tovel it. It's a doiraisa.
But again, the act itself is not really a physical act to the keli. Huh?
And by tumah?
We're talking about tumah. Were you talking about for goyim for
no? Mitzat tumah, you said you're not allowed to because it's going to cause tikkun.
It's kimatakin clear, yeah.
Okay, no, but I'm talking about a stamp keli where you're not allowed to use. If a guy made it, then in order for you to use it, you have to tovel. So that's tikkun.
Right. So which Dam didn't mention that. Maggid Mishnah is going to mention that, which he says it's the same thing.
Same thing.
Yeah. Al adam tamei mutter litboil b'pnei shinir kameka. But a person when he's toveling, it just looks like he's cooling himself off. Ein miles and all b'Shabbos, but hazayat that you can't do on Shabbos. So matbul kalim b'Shabbos. If you are go ahead and you do table kalim. So b'shoigeg yishtamash. When it was an accident, you can still use it. But mezid, if it was on purpose, you knew it was wrong. Yishtamash malamat Shabbos, you can use it after Shabbos. So mutal hatbul samayim atmeim b'Shabbos, and you're allowed to table tamei water to bake the tamei water tar. That you're allowed to do. How do you do it? So you have to make sure the keli itself is not being makabel tumah, because if it is makabel tumah, then the second you put the water in, it becomes tamei, and now you're being matar it, which you can't do. You can't be matar keli. So the kli itself can't be makabel tumah, and kli avanim, like good stone. Matbala kli b'mikvah, and you put the keli in the mikvah, until it touches and makes contact with the water of the mikvah, which is called hashaka, or at least that's the Mishnah calls it v'shavim shemashikim esamayim b'kli even l'taram, and the Maggid Mishnah adds v'da that tefillas kli tashmish hanikachim and anachri also pnei shenu k'matakin keli, and it'll come up again in Hilchos Yom Tov.
Yeah. Why shouldn't we say that this also depends if you need the keli for the next meal or something, or for the meal? Why should we get involved with something like this?
Says looks like you're fixing the keli. We said washing. We ended up saying wasn't really matakin the keli. We just said it's for after Shabbos. So that's a whole different issue. If that's really the issue, do you need it? Do you not need it? Here you're actually matakin the keli.
Yeah, you go from prohibition to permission. Yeah.
Halacha tes. You're not to separate tumah meiser. It also seems like you're fixing all the rest of the food by separating it. And we're going to have more on the topic of tumah meiser. A few halachas down, it's going to come up again. We'll see there. Halacha yod ma'abed. So we finally finished makah patish, and then move on to processing leather. So ma'abed, ma'aveis malacha. So that reminds us, ma'abed itself is an avalacha. And if you soften the leather with oil the way the professionals do, that's also ma'abed. Is ma'abed v'chayev. It's also mamash chayev. And now it brings us to the gzeira. What's the gzeira? So you can't put oil on your foot when it's inside a new shoe or a new sandal, because that seems too close to the problematic thing of putting oil on the leather. But if you put the oil on your foot first and then you put the shoe on, then it's okay. Even if it's new. And one could pour oil all over his body, and roll around. Algabe ktavulia chadasha. So ktavulia is a Greek word. It means something like a bedspread, something like that. A leather spread over the bed. So that's sort of why his whole body is on it. So even if it's new, so that's similar to putting the oil on your foot and then putting the foot in the shoe.
But by both these cases, whether by the shoe or whether by the leather spread, when the oil hits the leather, it is softening it. It is ma'abed.
So let's see the distinction that Rambam makes. When the oil was very little, it's just giving it a bit of a sheen, a bit of a polish. If there's a lot of oil, where it would actually soften the leather, and is also come out. That's also
There you
like
go.
Muhammad. This all relates to new. Aval b'yishanim mutter for old. It's okay. Halacha Yud Aleph. Moving on to memachik, which includes mimareach, spreading, smoothing. Mimareach retia. You have a bandage and you're smoothing it out. Chayav mishum mechik asar. That's actually chayav. So fichach, and here's the gzeira. Ein seis benakav b'shayva v'chayetzeva. You can't seal a hole with wax or something like that. Shama yimareach. You might also be smearing the wax out. Filu b'shuman ein seis benakav. Even with fat. Gzeira mishum shayva. That in turn is a gzeira because of the wax, which is because of mimareach. Maga Mishnah says, "Im tishal." And if you ask, didn't you learn in Perek Zion that you're not allowed to close any nekav with a or had it here in this halacha in halacha gimel? You're not allowed to close any nekav, even with a kesim or a tzir. So why do we need the gzeira of shayva and mimareach? So the Maga Mishnah says it's two different things. When we spoke about it earlier, the kesim, it's going all the way into the hole. It's filling the whole hole. That stima is makva patish. Here we're talking about just sealing the top. So that wouldn't be a problem of makva patish, but it would be a problem of mimareach. The Kesef Mishnah, however, says, he quotes the Maga Mishnah, and he says, it could be that Rambam holds that it's both. Also, Mishnah mimareach gamken. Halacha Yud Beis. Kaisef. Moving on to writing. Kaisef Mavaris Malachas. This is going to go from Halacha Yud Beis to Halacha Yud Ches. Writing is one of the Malachas. Vichach Aser Lichov Apuch V'Chayetzer V'Shabbos V'Neishu Kaisef. So therefore, a woman would not allow to put the glue around her eye. What's the correct term for it? I fail to recall, but
Mascara?
yeah, mascara, stuff like that.
What?
Mascara?
Yeah,
Mascara.
yeah, something like that, because that is a form of kaisef. And in yesterday's Perek, the last portion of yesterday's Perek, when the Ram got up to Tzeveya, the Ram also mentioned that she's not allowed to put red on her face because that's like Tzeveya, which brings us to the whole question nowadays of makeup and lipstick on Shabbos.
It's also partial.
So not 100% straightforward, apparently. The Gemara has these halachas about not the Rambam side here. Apparently, the Rif did not bring these halachas, or at least a few Rishonim, a minority who said that the Rif omitted it because it's actually mutter, because it's not real tzviyah. However, the Shulchan Aruch does bring these halachas. It says it's midrabanan, like we see here. It's in the list of shvusim over here. The question, though, is what if a woman already has lipstick and now she just wants to reinforce the lipstick? So she's not really being tzeveya because the tzeva is already there. So, and we say usually ain't tzviyah, acher tzviyah, but the Pesachim wanted to say it's mimareach. You're spreading, you're smearing the lipstick, and therefore the Igros Moshe paskin that if it's extremely liquid, then you would be allowed to add extremely liquid lipstick on top of lipstick that's already there. So that way you're avoiding both the tzviyah and the mimareach. When it comes to makeup. There's different types of makeup. There is something nominally called Shabbos makeup. I don't think in these parts it's considered okay. We're not trying to.
The Shabbos, the whole concept of the Shabbos makeup is you put it on Friday and it's so strong that it's going to stay on your face.
That's something else. No, there is something that exists that is they believe you're allowed to put because the claim is that it has to be something that really adheres very tightly to the skin. But if it's a very powdery kind of substance, so then it's not mimareach and it's not tzviyah, it's not miskayim. That's the logic there. Like I said, I don't think it's considered acceptable in these parts, as far as I know. There also is an element of mutav shiur shegegim when it comes to things that are very low level, like we saw other halachas here that Rebbe said mutav shiur shegegim. So if people are doing it, lav dafka, you have to scream at them. So that's that. Halacha, continuing halacha Yud Beis. Also a little bit of lahavis. Now we get to the Mekach Memkar type of stuff. So you know how to borrow and lend. You might write. You can't buy or sell, rent or rent out. You might write. You can't hire workers on Shabbos. You can't tell your friend to hire for you. But to borrow and lend objects, not money, mutter. You can borrow jugs of wine and oil, but don't say the term halveni, which sounds more like borrowing money, presumably. Halacha Yud Gimel. Also, whether you're selling by speaking about it or by actually exchanging, whether you're using scales or not. Just like you're not allowed to weigh things. You can't count or measure. Whether it's a measuring stick, your hand, a rope. These are all extensions of Mekach HaMamkar, which is all extension of Ksiva. Halacha, Yudalad, other things in Donim Shabbos, you can have Dintayra, Lecheltzim, Lemiyabim, Lemikadshin, so you can do Chalitza, Yibum, Kedushin, Zera, Shema Yichtev, all because of the writing.
Did we just say that you let her have a
Chuppah. No, that's
No.
Apparently, the Alter Rebbe was talking about Simchas Chuppah that's continuing from Friday into Shabbos.
Or Sheva Brachos, maybe.
Right.
It wasn't actual Kedushin.
Yeah, that's on Shabbos. So hektish, erchin, chedem, all different forms of hektish essentially. It's also you're transferring ownership of stuff. Now we get back to this. You're not to do truma meiser. It's also like hektish, which is in turn exeda mishum mekach which is mishum ksiva. Which is what he already said earlier in Halacha Tes. And then Magen Mishnah says, for Nisker din Zelamayla, and then I'm saying it again because it's talking two reasons. One is earlier we said Makava Patish, another one because of here, and the Rambam is going on a seder of the Ovis Malacha, so that's why sometimes you have this splintering. I mean, Bechlal, we had the Prakim of Ovis and told us much earlier, the Prakim of the Shvusim here, the Rambam didn't organize it by theme. By actual acts, by actual particular subjects. It's according to the Malachas, etc.
The only problem with Mechira is because of Ksira?
That's what we're saying, yeah. But
There's no other problem with it?
and you can't do Meiser Behema on Shabbos. Because you might mark it with the red pen. However, you could be Makdish your Pesach on Shabbos if it's Erev Shabbos, and your Chagiga on Yom Tov if it's Shabbos, or maybe just Yom Tov itself. That's the mitzvah of that day. And just like you can't do Hektish, you don't do the process, the ritual of making Mechatos, which Rambam discusses in the Halachas of Paraduma. What if you went ahead and you did separate the Truma Meiser? If you was B'Shegeg, you could eat the rest. Mezid, if it was on purpose, again, you have to wait. Either way, though, even if you wait till Matzah Shabbos, but it did have the desired effect. You did fix the payas. If you did hektish or any of those things on Shabbos, whether on purpose or not, whatever you did is done. And certainly on Yom Tov. And if you were makna something to someone, you made a kinyan, also the kinyan is a kinyan. Now, Dmai, which is the Amaretz, you're not sure if he did the Meiser or not. So that you're actually allowed to do as late as Ben Hashmashus, but not Tevel Vada that you're not allowed to do. Halacha Tazayin, Misha Kara Shem L'Trumas Meiser Shel Dmai, or the Meiser Ani Shel Vada. If you said that you're being mafresh the Trumas Meiser of Dmai, or Meiser Ani of not Dmai, Lo Yitleim b'Shabbos, you shouldn't take it on Shabbos. Even though you already set aside their place, a distinct place before Shabbos, and we know where they are, it's right next to everything else. But if there's a Kayan who would take the Chumas Meiser, or an Ani who would take the Meiser Ani, and they always eat, they're always his guests, they can come. But he has to announce, Trumas Meiser. When I'm giving you a Trumas Meiser, you're my guest, and I'm feeding you with the Meiser Ani that really belongs to you, because that's a separate halacha. You're not allowed to get credit, undeserved credit. If you have Meiser Ani, you're not generally allowed to act like you're being generous to your friend, and really you're secretly Mekayim in the midst of Meiser Ani. You have to tell them. Halacha Yedzayin. Also, you're not to make raffles or play dice on Shabbos. Also, an extension. These are all extensions of this principle. Maybe it's based on but if there's different size portions, and you want to make a raffle with your family, who gets the bigger or smaller portion, that's allowed. Because that's not a real transaction. Everyone's just playing along.
Monopoly.
Sure.
That's the real thing.
Yeah, we just said before that what the whole of business is mitzat ksiva.
Yeah.
So monopoly is like it's a game, it's a business game.
Yeah, it seems problematic.
It seems problematic.
Yeah.
Why? Because you're afraid of ksiva.
However, interestingly, earlier by the halachas of chess over there and other games on the floor, which might to play like kugelach on the floor on the ground because it might be mash v'gumais. When it comes to games, the Alter Rebbe says not to be meicha to the nashim and the ktanim. It's one of those things that mutav shiusheg again. So if you see kids playing it, maybe you don't have to tell them anything.
What about selling Goliath and Shabbos and Shul? How does that come into play? You also they're tagging it.
That's very they're
Yeah. Obviously, it's for a mitzvah, and I looked it up once. Actually, someone in the show asked me to look it up once, and apparently it state that you're allowed to use those types of making a simon like this and like that, and it sidesteps the problem here. Halacha Yudches. Also, l'chashiv cheshbonos shetzarich lem Shabbos. You're not to make calculations that you need on Shabbos. Ben she'avar, ben she'as liyas, whether it's from the past or for the future. Gzeira shemich, because you might end up writing. Seems to be typical. But if it's useless, if it's just random calculations, mutar l'chashiv, and you are allowed to. Ketzad. If you're just sitting around and talking, you say, "Kama sa'ah hayilana b'shana plainus." How many sa'ah did we have that year? Kama dinar and haitzi b'chasas b'nei. How much money did he spend on his son's wedding? Stuff like that. Who cares, one way or the other? You shouldn't be whipping out a pen if you can't figure it out. That should be okay. It's interesting to point out for those familiar with Zmiris. So there's the famous Zemer Ma Yedidus Menuchasech. So one of the lines there is based on some of these halachas. Chafatzecha asurim legam lachshev cheshbeinis erharim mutarim ulashadech habanas. And so the gamach of cheshbeinis, you're not allowed to make cheshbeinis on Shabbos. For those familiar, halacha yud tes, and here's a whole additional halacha, which is itself really a whole major subject. Also, likras b'shitrei hadyotis b'Shabbos. You're not allowed to read documents on Shabbos. Shaloi kachol b'yavei limchik, because if it's like a weekday atmosphere, you might start making corrections and erasing. You're allowed to count your guests and the dishes or whatever you have orally, but with just verbally, but not with writing. We don't want you to end up reading from documents. So therefore, if they're engraved on a board on the wall, and then you're allowed to you wouldn't confuse that with the document. Now to read the caption under a picture, under a portrait on Shabbos. Or even to read ksuvim from Tanakh. And during the time of Beis Medrash, back then there was a minhag that there was a Shas Beis Medrash, a special time of learning. So you weren't allowed to read ksuvim then. As aser, gzeira mishlam bittul Beis Medrash, you'll be too engrossed in the ksuvim, and you will skip out on the Beis Medrash. We don't want people sitting at home and reading and not showing up to Beis Medrash.
In the shul, they put out all the circulars.
Right. So nowadays you have all kinds of, first of all, the advertisements. In any advertisement would be a concern of Shitra Yoitis. Recipes specifically are pointed out, are called out as being issue Shitra. I actually have a whole sefer, literally a whole sefer on Shitra Yoitis. And it's very lengthy and complex. And now I'm distilled it here into one little halacha. And lots of questions of the applications nowadays. Let's say captions nowadays under a picture. Is that still an issue, or do we live in a different context nowadays? What's the significance of the caption?
That put up at the from public that are dafka get for Shabbos reading. Mishpacha
Right.
magazine,
And the
Bina magazine.
so I think some say if you look through it before Shabbos, that could ameliorate the problem. Look through all the ads, look through all the recipes. It's a topic. It's a whole. It's a subject in halacha. Okay, we'll try to finish off the rest of the Perek as quickly as we can, and let's not get too bogged down with it. So this all relates to mechabe, kibui on Shabbos. So if there's a fire, you're not to save things and take it to another chutzner, even if there's an erev. If you're too involved in saving stuff, you might end up extinguishing the fire. You can only save the food you need for that Shabbos, the clothing you need for that Shabbos, and any clothing you can pile on yourself. Because then when you're that limited, you give up on everything else and you'll never end up extinguishing. And if there's no erev, you can't save anything. What can you say for food? If it's Friday night, there's 3 meals. For whatever a man needs for him, whatever the animals need for them. If it's already the morning, there's for 2 meals. If it's the afternoon, for 1 meal. When do we say you can only take exactly 3 and no more? So that's if you need a lot of kalim to do that, or you keep on refilling. So then you can only take what you need. But if you have one huge keli, you take it in one shot. Even if it's loaded with lots of sudas inside, mutter, it's okay. You can take a basket full of bread. The eagle shall dvela, a big bunch of figs or dates stuck together. A barrel of wine. Or you took your cloak and you loaded up with whatever you could and you took it all in one shot. Mutter. You tell others, go take what you need. Go take the meals that they need. Or anyone can take a huge keli and take out a whole another pile of stuff. And ultimately the person who takes it can keep it though. If you ran in and grabbed it, but then you were just trying to be nice, you were just trying to give it to the guy who really owns it, you can actually charge after Shabbos for the effort. And it's not like taking reward payment for Shabbos. You didn't actually do malach or an iser. Technically, he was totally mutter to take something where there's an erev. It's just a gzeira for the guy who might do kibui. If you saved good bread, clean white bread, you can't go then and save the whole wheat bread. But if you save the whole wheat bread first, you can say, hey, that's actually not what I want. I prefer the better bread for my meal. And you can save on Yom Kippur for Shabbos if it was Erev Shabbos. But not vice versa. For Shabbos to Yom Tov, do things on Shabbos for after Shabbos. And we said with clothing, what can you save? You wear whatever you can wear and you wrap whatever you can wrap and you go out to them. And you say, everyone, you go save what you can save. Everyone puts on whatever they can. But then they can keep it if they want. And it's hefker. It was burning and he couldn't save it, so that's essentially hefker. Not
because of Viyush on part of the Balabas.
I didn't look into the exact mechanism. Maybe this does include Yush, or I don't know. It's point being that it's burning and it's not something he can save. So
whatever way you want to look at it.
Yeah. You're allowed to save holy books, holy writings in a chatzir to another chatzir in the same mavai, even if there is no erev. This brings us back to the lachos of mavai, as long as the mavai is a mavai that you're allowed to carry in, because it has to be mechitzas and alechi. So the problem is only the erev, not the tiltal itself. But it has to be written in the formal Ksav Ashuri and in Hebrew. But if it's a different script or a different language, then you can't save it even with an erev. And you're not really supposed to, back then, you're not supposed to use those other ksavim, and you leave them somewhere where they just decompose. If they're written now with the regular ink, even though it's not lasting writing, it's written as a formal ksav of Kisvei HaKodesh, and you do say them. The margins, the blank part, I guess in some kind of scenario where they separate it. Back then, there were, especially if you're in time of Chazal, it really wasn't that. You weren't really meant to have anything else in writing. You weren't supposed to have Svarim Chitzonim, so you had Kisvei HaKodesh, or what else? So you have brachas and kameas. Even though there's a lot of holy stuff, it's shameless technically. You can't save them in this circumstance because of the fire. Even if it's incomplete, but you can get 85 letters together on this sheet, on this urea, out of complete words. Afilu b'chlo and Yegarsa Adusa is Aramaic, but it's still holy, it still counts. V'chein ha'ma'isa by parsha she'em lo shmonim v'chamesh oisis yesh ba'askaros, or it was a parsha that doesn't have 85 letters, but it has Hashem's name, going by Yibn Seha'aron, which is his own parsha. Matzil and oisis pnei, you can save that as well from the fire. Matzil and tikka sefer, ima sefer, the tick tefillin, ima tefillin, you can save the sefer Torah along with the tick, or today we have a mantle, or the tefillin with a tefillin bag, even if there is money inside.
Right.